Hey YouTube, it's Eman. I'm back for another true crime video, and I think the one that I chose to discuss today is going to be quite interesting in my opinion. But before I get into any details, let me just give a small disclaimer, a little warning, maybe a beware sign. Some of the information and details that we're going to be discussing today can be triggering for some folks. We're going to be talking about some gory details, of course, in relation to a crime that was committed, since this is a true crime video. So if you just don't like that kind of content, well, I would just suggest to click on a different video of mine. Check some of those out, maybe a paranormal story time, a lifestyle video, yeah, or just catch me next time. But this story in particular shouldn't be too gruesome, so on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to say it's about a 3, a 4 maybe. The details themselves, I don't really get too in-depth about them, since honestly they weren't that easy to find online anyways. We all know that Egypt is mostly conservative and they don't really like to discuss gory details in general, so it's very hard to find certain details pertaining to a case because they state things so vaguely. So anyways, let's hop into it. Let me just pull up my notes. So today's true crime case is going to be about Saad, Iskandar, Abdelmeseeh. Heard of him? Anybody? No? Yeah? Well, this murder is kind of an old murder. It happened back in the 1950s, and he was a very notorious serial killer located in the city of Alexandria. But prior to him arriving to Alexandria, he actually grew up in the hometown of Asyut. And while in Asyut, he was working at a weaving textile company that was owned by his older brother. Now, many people would say that he was a very handsome fella. He was charming. He knew how to talk to the ladies. He was easily likable. He was the type of individual that can make you feel comfortable, have you gain his trust, and then we'll get into the and then later. But we all know that most sociopaths or psychopaths can easily do this. So they can easily go kill someone, commit several murders, and then be the most lovely individual to their neighbors, to the people that know them on a day-to-day basis. So him being charming isn't a surprise to me at all. Now, while there at his brother's textile company back in Asyut, he had met a widowed older woman. Now, he was able to befriend her. He was able to get her to gain his trust. And he was having an affair with this woman. Now, after a while of having this affair with her, he was then able to gain her trust, learn about where her valuables are kept, figure out where she keeps her money. And then one day, while they were in the middle of having relations, he then stabs this woman in the back several times, killing her instantly, and then robs her, takes her valuables and her money, and decides to buy a ticket over to Alexandria, Egypt. Now, when he got to Alexandria, Egypt, he was still keeping up the masquerade of him being in the textile weaving company, and he then bought this small little storage unit of an office type of looking thing. Now, the storage unit itself was located in the neighborhood of Raghab Basha Karmuz, which is going to be the location for the majority of his murders. Now, in September 1948, around the time of him moving into this neighborhood, people of the community started noticing that women started to vanish, disappear. They weren't able to locate not a dead body nor a living one. They just started disappearing out of nowhere. So every 4 to 5 days, a new girl would go missing, which started to raise alarming awareness amongst the community. The police started realizing that something weird was going on, so they started to investigate, but they were left confused because they didn't have any idea as to where to start. Again, they weren't finding any bodies, none of the women were turning up, So if they couldn't, they had nothing or no leads to really go on. Now, since he's gotten away with several murders by this time, Abdelmeseeh then meets a woman named Fatma. Fatma had her own house in a nearby community. Now, to make sure that Fatma's neighbors wouldn't ridicule her, she would then introduce Abdelmeseeh as her older brother, which everyone knew she had an older brother, but they had never met prior, so they took her word as fact. They didn't give her too much of a hard time about it. They just believed her when she said that this random man is my brother. And he was constantly visiting her every night, so, I mean. However, when this affair began with Abdelmeseeh, Fatma then starts to get comfortable. She starts telling him about her next door neighbor, this senile old woman that's in her 90s who has a lot of money, who is well off, who has a lot of valuables. I don't know why Fatma decided to tell him about this lady. And I'm not sure if Fatma knew of what this man was really into, but apparently Fatma just liked to talk a lot. So she was telling her neighbor's business for sure. Now, of course, this intrigued Abdelmeseeh, because then he starts divulging a plan of returning the next night, which he did. But instead of going to Fatma's house, he went over to her neighbor, who went by the name as Mrs. Bembe, which, by the way, for the Arabic speakers, is just translates to pink. I thought that was kind of interesting. So Mrs. Bembe lived alone. All of her sons they were already grown and moved out. And when he knocked on the door, she opened it because she thought that it might have been one of her sons coming over to visit, which she was expecting one of them to arrive. But she didn't find one of her sons at the door. She found a man that she didn't know. Now, Abdelmeseeh didn't waste any time. He grabbed her, put his hand over her mouth, and he took his cleaver and he struck her twice, so hard that it severed the entire head off of her body, rolling on the ground. But before he was able to do that, she was able to let out one scream. And that one scream attracted the ear of one of her neighbors that lived downstairs in her basement. And this woman went by the name of Katkut, which again is interesting to me because Katkut translates to little chick in Arabic. I don't believe that these names are the real actual names of these individuals. I feel like that's just the name that the media or the police had given them to protect their identities, but I thought that they were really appropriate, so I kept them for the story. Now, Katkut went over to Bembe's house and she knocked on the door. When Abdelmeseeh answered the door, this was after already he ransacked Mrs. Bembe's house. He already grabbed all of the valuables that he needed, the money that he wanted, and he was on his way out anyway. So when he opened the door and he found Katkut there, she was inquiring about the screams. She was worried. She was asking about where was Miss Bembe. So of course Abdelmeseeh, who was very bold at this time, he was already growing in confidence. He felt as if he was unstoppable at this time because he already committed several murders prior to this. He then tells her calmly in a nonchalant manner that Mrs. Bembe was inside praying. Wanting to see for herself, Katkut then enters the home, walks past Abdelmeseeh, who's standing at the threshold of the door. And when she does this and she has her back to him, he then takes his cleaver and bangs her over the head with it, where she starts gushing out blood, falling to the ground, laying in her own pool of blood. Abdelmeseeh then leaves the premises. He goes back to his little storage unit that same night. However, the son of Mrs. Bembe that was supposed to be visiting that night ended up coming by, finding the two bodies, and noticed and realized that Katkut actually wasn't dead yet. So he took her to the hospital. After being miraculously saved, Katkut actually made it through. She was then able to talk to the police and the investigators and let them know about who was the person that did this to them. So Katkut remember back when Fatma was introducing Abdelmeseeh to all of her neighbors as her brother? Well, that's where Abdelmeseeh made his first mistake. He left one witness behind. He didn't know that Katkut was still alive. So Katkut was then able to identify the attacker as Fatma's older brother. So when the police came and they pulled in Fatma's real older brother, Katkut told them that that wasn't the man. So left with their head scratching, well, if this isn't the attacker, then who is, right? They then go straight to Fatma and bring her in for questioning. So Fatma then tells the police about her lies, her deception, the fact that she was having this man named Abdelmeseeh come over to her house and they were having an affair, and she would introduce the man as her older brother, when yet in fact he was not related to her at all. And most people in Egypt will do this. Like, if they don't want people to talk about them in the streets, if they don't want a lot of ridicule from the public, if they don't want to be called and labeled a whore per se, they'll make up these kind of lies. They'll just introduce men that as their cousins, their brothers, their uncles, whatever they have to do in order to not have to answer a lot of questions. So it is fairly common. Now, keep in mind, before this, Abdelmeseeh was committing his murders all back at his storage unit. You know, the storage unit he bought as a front for his fake textile company. So this was a big change in his MO, which is probably why this is the first mistake that he had made. Now, after Fatma outed Abdelmeseeh to the police were then able to go to the storage unit where Abdelmeseeh was located, arrest him in his small little office. So that's when Abdelmeseeh was brought in for questioning. However, due to lack of evidence and conflicting witness statements from the neighbors, the authorities didn't have much to really hold Abdelmeseeh on. So Abdelmeseeh's lawyer at the time was able to get him off on bail, and that's when he disappeared for about 2 years after that. However, authorities were still conducting their investigation. In 1951, Abdelmeseeh then bought something similar to a cottage-like structure on the Mahmoudiyya Canal, something that he can store some grain and some textiles in. However, at this time, this is when Abdelmeseeh's MO started to evolve. He wasn't only just taking female victims now. Now he began killing and murdering men as well. He would lure in merchants, hoping to strike up a business deal. And when they would come into his storefront, have them start looking at the yarn, looking at different textiles, and as they turned away to look at the items, that's when Abdelmeseeh would start striking them with his cleaver. He severed off their heads, similar to what he did to every other one of his victims, and he would bury their body in a barn-like structure in the back of the building. In November 1951, a grain dealer was then lured in the same kind of way. However, this grain dealer nearly got away with his life, because when Abdelmeseeh first struck him, he was able to actually start running away from him. He got as far as the front hall of the building itself, and that's when Abdelmeseeh caught him, finished him off. But little did he know, at the same time he did this act, one of the workers was driving by on a truck, and there was another worker on the back of the truck that witnessed the entire scene. After this witness went straight to the police, told them what he saw, gave him the identity of Abdelmeseeh yet again. And when the police returned to the scene of the crime, they found the bodies still left on the ground, everything there for them to see. And as they further searched the area, they were able to find other dead bodies, all at different stages of decomposition. And that's when all the evidence started to pile up against Abdelmeseeh. Now they had bodies, now they had a whole scene that was fresh, similar to Mrs. Bemba's death, that they were able to then connect back to. and everything started to make sense for the investigators. So police continued their investigation in Carmuz, where he was last located. They were able to find the little storage unit, his old office, and they started to find all of his past victims. All of their bodies were still there. That's why the women would go and vanish, because he wasn't burying the bodies anywhere else other than the scene of the crime. So he had all of the evidence just neatly tied up in a bow for investigators to find once they knew where to look. Now back on the run, Abdelmeseeh decided, okay, well, it's time to get out of Alexandria. Let's go ahead and buy a bus ticket and get back to Asyut, which is his hometown. So that was his plan, was to go back home. Now while on the bus, that's when the police started having random checkpoints. And at one of these checkpoints, a lieutenant by the name of Fakhr Abdelmeseeh was able to look on the bus, and he kept staring at Abdelmeseeh for a long period of time, thinking to himself that this man looks oddly familiar. Once he was able to place who he was, he then arrested Abdelmeseeh on Sunday, February 25th, 1953. Abdelmeseeh was then taken to Hadera prison in Alexandria and placed in the chamber of death. Apparently, after sitting in the chamber for several hours while the committee was deliberating amongst all the evidence that was brought forth by the investigators, Abdelmeseeh's conscience started to come into play. Apparently the man had one. Go figure. And that's when he decided to whisper in the ear of one of the guards and tell him that he was a victim. He was a victim by 3 different women in his life, and the victim at the hands of his own family. You know, was really playing up that victim role, the victim narrative, the victim mentality, trying to garnish some sympathy or pity from this guard. However, it didn't really go far for him, because at that point, the committee then came to their deliberations and decided to punish him by death. Now, when he was asked if he wanted anything before his execution, Abdelmeseeh then asked for, get this, not a meal, not a pen and paper to write a letter to anybody. He only asked for a glass of water and a cigarette. Priorities, right? He just needs a smoke. Minutes later, after obliging him, he was then hanged, because we all know Egypt still does the old-fashioned hanging as capital punishment, which I'm not mad at. Again, you know, like I'm kind of a fan. It's like quick, simple, done. It's like, if it's not broken, why fix it, right? It works, I suppose. And plus, in my opinion, this man committed several different murders. Why in the heck would I care about his comfort at the end of his death? He didn't care about any of his victims when he was stabbing them in the back, severing off their heads. You know, like, no. I'm not gonna feel sorry for him. That is the story of Saad Iskandar Abdelmeseeh. What do you guys think? So the only thing that I'm left wondering at this point is, how many people did he actually kill? There was not like a solid number online that I could find for the amount of victims that he had. Again, we all know that he did go ahead and murder both men and women. It did start off as women only, and then it evolved into men and women as he grew more comfortable with the idea of killing. The only other thing other than that I am curious about is his upbringing, just because of his last statement to his guard, stating that he was a victim by 3 women. Which 3 women was he referring to? I'm not quite sure. And he was the victim of his own family. I don't know what his family supposedly did to him growing up. I mean, but for a person to get this like crazy and this sadistic, something must have happened to him. We all know from criminology that, well, some are born killers, but there is very little of a chance for a person to just be born a killer. Usually that individual has to go through some kind of trauma, some kind of something, usually in their childhood, right, that brings them to that point. So that's the only thing that I couldn't find about this case. I'm left wondering, if you have that information, share it with us in the comments down below. And remember, everybody, stay kind, spread love, spread knowledge, and I'll see you guys all in the next video. All right.